characterize masculinity versus femininity?
I mostly characterize them through like a spiritual lens. So there's a lot of different options. There's the astrological lens of the planets, so masculine and feminine planets. The masculine planets are Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, which are sort of action, war, expansion, optimism, and innovation, but also discipline and limitations. And then if you think of the feminine planets, they're Venus, Neptune, and the moon, which are all about nurturing, love, creativity, beauty, but then also deception and illusions. So that's the main framework with which I think about those two. But I also tend to think about them through yin and yang, which is more about, where our energy is lying in our body, sort of like calm, down, slow energy versus high, excited, fiery energy. So that's the framework that I'm working from. How about you?
I think about it in a sort of primal and maybe elemental way, where I think there's primal versions of masculinity and femininity, and those operate on a spiritual dimension. To me, the masculine energy tends to be more externally directed, focused on like acting on the world. It tends to be more objective, more logical, more kind of mathematical. It tends to be solid and steady. It tends to be less shifting. I think masculine energy is a little bit more like a cube than like a liquid. It's more of a solid than a liquid. I think feminine energy is flowing, relational. It's softer and gentler. I think feminine energy is kind of drawing in. Masculine energy is sort of giving off. And feminine energy is kind of the glue that like holds everything together. It's what makes community possible. It's what makes caring about like relationships possible. It's very connective, very flowing, very just kind of a sacred, good, incredibly valuable energy. And I think both of these sort of aspects of masculinity and femininity as sort of primal energetic things, I think they manifest in people of both sexes. Women have masculine aspects of them, men have feminine aspects of them, and there's a huge spectrum within the masculine and the feminine, where people can be much more masculine in their spirits or much more feminine in their spirits, and much more masculine in their bodies and feminine in their bodies. And it's a beautiful distribution, just a lot of variety and kind of this sacred distribution of gifts.
Yeah, I think that's what I actually like about the astrological lens is that like when you look at the birth chart, you can see that some planets have more dominance in a singular person's chart than others, and some are more apparent in their personality than others. Some people are like super feminine planets leaning. Some people are a good balance of both. So it gives us this perspective that all of that is sort of living within us, and sometimes it's activated and sometimes it's not, and it comes out of us in very different ways. Like I like to think about the fact that like I'm a Mars ruled person. I feel very connected to my inner masculine. And my chart ruler, if you know what that means, is Mars. So I feel very compelled to act and very oriented towards exercise and I'm I'm very confrontational, in I think a
Yes,
positive
we
way.
love that about you.
Yeah, I'm just not afraid of conflict. And so, yeah, that all feels very Mars to me. But yeah, I agree that there's this, because their energies, they're not sex specific, although they're sort of inspired by the primitive experience of the sexes and the way that we operated as, primal beings.
So, on using this framework of the masculine and the feminine, it seems like in the world today, there's a lot of conflict between men and women. And you see this in our culture and how we talk about work. You see it in our culture and how we talk about dating. And what do you feel like is some of the kind of causes of current masculine feminine misalignment?
I mean, I think a lot of it is this like sort of like rigid ideas of what masculinity and femininity are. And this like desire for like men to be masculine and women to be feminine, and there's sort of no like motion between those. In like some ways I sort of like agree with traditional gender roles just in the way that they like operate in terms of like the body, but in terms of like how we express ourselves, there seems to be like quite a bit of friction there, right? Because there's like always going to be people who act outside of norms. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's so many things that are creating that misalignment. I think some of it has to do with the fact that we're sort of denying ourselves of our like women are denying themselves of their own femininity, men are often denying themselves of their true masculinity. We're sort of being asked to play each other in this life, but we're all sort of both, right? So I think it's complicated. How are you feeling about it? How would you characterize the misalignment?
I think the misalignment has a cultural origin, which has something to do with the way we sort of raise men as if they're defective girls and we raise women as if they're defective men. We have this sort of mindset in the default culture that men and women are basically the same and that it's really just kind of like a tiny biological difference, a physical features as opposed to a kind of radically different spiritual and personality based orientation towards the world and to relating to the world. So the way we raise women, we raise them to be fiercely independent, very career ambitious, and these two traits, I think, sort of naturally shut you off a little bit from your just natural femininity and your feminine intuition. I think a woman who is trying to conform to a very independent and I don't need anybody shape is basically denying the essential nature of femininity, which is to be in relational harmony with people around you and to care about that and to want to express warmth to the world, to want to be nurturing, to want to be caring. And on the flip side, we raise men as if they're defective women, and we want men to suppress their masculinity, which we say is toxic or outdated, and that sort of any form of like a masculine energetic expression is just bad. We want young boys to sit quietly and not speak unless spoken to. That's what they learn in the schools. We want men to be quote unquote more emotionally vulnerable and open and express those emotions in a way that is more legible to women, which is not natural for men. And it's kind of confusing, I think, for men to be raised this way because they will always feel that they're doing something that's not in alignment with their nature. And I think we see the results of this playing out with how men are not really succeeding in school. They're not having a good experience in that environment in the mainstream education system. They're withdrawing from society in kind of greater numbers than ever before. There's a lot of men who have very low ambition and are basically in this cycle of, I'm going to, do the bare minimum of school or work that is needed for me to get by. And then I'm going to spend my weekend playing video games and watching porn and not really being a part of the broader world. And that's really sad. It's a devastating and tragic outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of tragic things about that, right? I mean, in some ways, you could sort of break down the whole birth decline issue around this of, if we lose men, I think women make a lot of jokes about male uselessness that I find pretty disgusting, to be honest. I mean, we would never talk about any other group of people in the world the way that women have felt so comfortable to speak about men in the past 10 years. And the realities of like losing male participation in society are devastating. It's extinction. And I don't think that anybody's taking that very seriously. And obviously, like that's the macro. But on an individual scale, there's people who could be creating amazing things for humanity, becoming amazing fathers, being active, like joyful participants in this life who are just completely dipping out. And not only did they miss out on the joys of life, but we miss out on the joy of getting to know them. And yeah, I find it all like very disappointing. And I tend to be very critical of women, I think because they're on they sort of have the upper hand right now. And so I tend to just criticize the person who's taking, who has the most weight on the scale as a desire to sort of create balance. But I think there's also in this criticism of women, there is like a responsibility for men to hone their masculinity and say, actually, the most masculine thing that I can do right now, the most manly thing that I can do right now is not listen, is to continue, because that's what men do. They like forge forward, they initiate, they don't participate. And instead, we're seeing a lot of movements of men sort of giving in to that and becoming sort of like a toxic feminine archetype embodied in a man, which I find fascinating that that's the route that men decided to go down.
I think there's something to be said there about how these men have so deeply ingrained the kind of feminine mainstream culture that it's the only way they know how to think or express themselves. So if you look at kind of like the incel type of energy, that's a movement that's based on like resentment and victimhood. And there are obviously aspects in which men are victims of this kind of negative cultural energy around them, and this idea that masculinity is bad, men are useless, and that also being a useless man is like just this horrible, horrible thing. And it's easy to fall into a cycle of, yeah, these people are going to give me a framework and language and shared culture of understanding my loneliness and my isolation and the fact that I don't feel valued by society. But like you said, that's a very weak frame. It's giving in to victimhood. It's also rejecting, comprehensively rejecting the responsibility you have as a man to become a man. And I think this is something that is really important for the culture, to regain this idea that a man is something you become. It's
Mhm.
not something that's going to happen to you. You can't passively just go through life and expect yourself to become a man as a boy. You are going to actually have to intentionally do difficult things and cultivate skills and value and be willing to act upon the world and give freely. That's the part that people get hung up on, especially. I think in the like incel world, is that there's this idea that women are taking advantage of you. And the message I would want to give to those people is that if you become a generous and powerful man, there is nobody who can take anything from you because your spirit will infinitely regenerate. You can give freely, you can love people. It's going to be great. Nothing bad will happen to you for being generous.
Yeah. And the reality of generosity is that like the more that we give, the more we have to give. And it does turn out to be like you discover that you're just like this well of love. And it's just a really beautiful realization that like we're we're actually not scarce in resources. There's lots of us. And there's more of us than we know. I think also women have that same responsibility. I mean, traditionally, men have always experienced these like sort of like initiation processes into manhood, right? And women's initiation process was originally having a baby, right? But I think that more than that, I think that's sort of like a false reality. Like, I think you can become a mother and not become a mother and not become a woman, you know? And the reality, I think, for women is that you can pretend to be a man. You can become, a CEO of a company. You can have babies. You can do the like having it all behavior and still not become a woman. Because the reality of being like a woman is this energy of like totally being comfortable in your ability to receive gifts from others, not feeling like you're being trapped by others' generosity or being tricked into some sort of transaction. It's not greediness. It's this like deep relaxation, knowing that if you simply move through the world in a comfort and relaxed state while also creating beauty, that good things will come. It's this like desire to stop chasing, which is so in opposition with the masculine energy that they're like, that majority women are currently embodying, is this like, gotta get it, gotta secure the things, gotta feel safe sort of scarcity mindset. But it feels like both genders are sort of in a scarcity mindset at the moment.
You said that women are chasing a lot more, and you see that in their career, but you also see that in dating and romance, that women are, I think, more aggressively pursuing men and more aggressively pursuing lots of men at the same time and trying to kind of lock down the best one. It's pretty normal for, I think, women in the mainstream culture to be thinking about men in terms of kind of having a roster. And this is sort of an inversion of the historical norm where I think men were a little bit more likely to chase and more likely to chase multiple women at the same time. What do you think about what kind of misalignments are caused by this, or rather, where do they come from? Either question is important.
I mean, to me, this is sort of like a Jungian issue of like unintegrated anima and animus, right? I think women, I don't know what the source of it is. Maybe it was uh, the reconstruction of the nuclear family and the way that like sort of we started outsourcing like industry instead of like we used to be sort of like farm people that like the family was the business or what. But it, you know, it feels a lot like women feel sort of disappointed by like men, or like maybe fatherhood got lost in there somewhere. I don't really know what the like source of all of this is, but it seems like women feel this need to like provide for themselves and be independent as a means of like avoiding being trapped by a man. And when you are in a state as a woman who where you're just chasing and chasing and chasing, that to me is a sign that you just don't you have this desire to dominate. You want to have power over as a means of hiding your powerlessness, your feelings of powerlessness. And you hear this often with women where they'll sort of like bounce back and forth between this like sort of like victim mentality and then this like I need to dominate point of view where like you're like both like a victim of society and a girl boss. And women can be, you know, have a 54% hiring rate in a society and still be considered oppressed in the workplace. You know, it's like these things like don't exactly match up. And yet, so it's to me, it seems like an expression of an inner feeling more than like an outer reality. And like some of that is real, right? Like women are always going to be like physically sort of oppressed, right? Because we're just naturally smaller than men. But that doesn't mean that we're like on a societal scale, like politically oppressed, right? Like we have all the same rights as men. And so there are just some like natural realities that are always going to sort of keep us from being fully like men and fully of the same like equal status as men. But, you know, there's nothing we can do about that.
I think a lot about how this idea that men and women are like literally equal as opposed to spiritually equal in an asymmetric and complementary way causes a lot of the tension that people face between the culture they were raised in and the reality of the world. As I've gotten older, I have just become so much more confident and assured in my belief that, yep, men and women are genuinely quite different from each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's something to celebrate. It's really a cause for celebration. The world would be pretty unpleasant if men and women were just these sort of interchangeable blocks of people and with no differentiation between them other than minor physical, biological differences. On the broad scale, I think men and women have so much to offer each other. And we've kind of gotten disconnected from the reality that that requires giving to each other in the ways that we're meant to uniquely as men and women.
Yeah, I think so too. And like, you know, I think that there's this whole mentality about men that they're like providers, right? And I think there's some truth to that, to like the masculine point of view that you enjoy providing. I definitely feel connected to like the provider sort of desire. I like to be, you know, in some ways I'm sort of like contradicting myself simply by being myself because I do feel very masculine. But I think there's also I think deciding that men are providers sort of like negates what women provide too, and so women feel like left out by that description when in reality what they mean is like men are providing resources and then women provide the creation from those resources, right? Men provide, let's say men provide money for women to buy things, right? Like, and that's like maybe a very like uh literal and and sort of under, I don't know, it's not like quite the fullness of what women and men are capable of. But it's this idea that like we both are providing in the world. It's just like we provide very different things, and they're sort of in conjunction with each other.
There was something you said there about anima and animus that I wanted to kind of circle back to, as well as this idea of providing. The way we raise women to be so independent right now, I think that necessarily blocks them from receiving. And this is something a lot of men struggle with and feel frustrated by, is that they want to give to women, but the woman is shut off from receiving. Mm-hmm. And this is oftentimes more about, I think, emotional giving and giving love, giving affection, giving attention. And there's a feeling that for men, especially men who are kind of struggling with their confidence or their status, that what they have to offer is not valuable, and basically everyone in society is kind of blocked off from receiving from them. Mm-hmm. What do you think a man who's kind of in that situation should do? Or conversely, what can a woman do to become more open to receiving?
Well, I think a man should just continue giving anyway. I would just suggest don't become cynical. You're sort of like doing yourself a favor by doing that, right? And women who are struggling to receive are typically pretty insecure, right? They're anxious, they're really worried that, and like, you know, I've been one of those women before, and I'm very glad that a man was willing to give to me anyway, and was just really patient. Like I was sort of like a wild animal where he was like never sure whether I was going to like bark at him or I was going to cuddle up next to him. And he just kept giving to me anyway until I finally was like, oh, like I can just lay down here. I don't actually need to do anything for food. You know, that was sort of like, it really felt like he was like taming a wild animal in a lot of ways. So I would say just keep giving. And if you find somebody that you really, really love and is struggling to receive, like work with them, just work with them. And, simultaneously, you'll be able to tell who is not going to take to it and who's not, or who's going to take to it and who's not intuitively. When it comes to women and receiving, I actually think that all of the like calm your nervous system stuff is great for this. I think the popularization of learning to calm your nervous system and like lymphatic drainage and learning to become more relaxed is so good for women. And like, I hope that doesn't go out of style. Like, let's just keep going with it. Because the more relaxed women are, the less like, again, in that scarcity mindset women are, the more likely they are to be able to receive openly. And if somebody gives to you and then comes back later and says, well, I did this for you, what are you going to do for me? Then throw it back at them and say, your generosity is a sham. You know, I'm not going to stop accepting generosity just because some people lied to me about their generosity. You know, that's on them, not on you. So stay open-hearted, you know, all that junk. How about you? What do you see about men how do you think men should approach this issue?
There's multiple threads to pull on here. One of the threads, and this one affects both men and women, is discernment and this idea of having good judgment. We live in a culture which really valorizes non-judgmentalness as one of the highest virtues. You're supposed to be completely non-judgmental and open-minded about everyone and everything. And I just want to push back on that and say You can be very, very discerning about what people tell you about themselves, about what you observe about people, and the way they act and the way they live. Because people genuinely are the way they are. I'm not saying that nobody's ever going to change, but what I am saying is that change tends to either happen slowly over long periods of time or very, very suddenly overnight as a result of like an intense spiritual experience. But change does not just happen as a matter of convenience or, um, you know, magical improvements. A person is not going to suddenly become a much better man because he's in a quote unquote serious committed relationship. A woman is not going to suddenly become serious about having a family or building a life together if she's living a lifestyle that's not moving towards those things. And this isn't to say that people who are doing like certain things are bad people. I'm not saying it's like wrong to party or have a hookup or be casual about dating and sex. But what I am saying is that you can absolutely very deliberately and intentionally judge who you want to be closer to in your life, and that you can and probably should filter that level of closeness by values and value alignment. And this is where it comes back to discernment because it's all about judgment. You have to trust your own eyes. You have to trust your own gut. There's so much cultural energy pushing people to feel like they owe a justification for making any kind of a decision or having any kind of a belief. And what I would want to tell those people is nobody is going to be responsible for my life other than me. And I am going to have to own every decision I make, every relationship I have. It's a reflection of me and who I am. And I don't want to be in a situation where at the end of my life, I have this long list of excuses of all the people that I listened to that were wrong and all the social rules I followed that were made up. That's not how I want to die.
That's so real. You and I talk a lot about values and like identifying values and why they're super important. And I think that that's a huge reason is that like it's pretty impossible to be able to discern things that you prefer, things that you don't prefer, whether you should stay in a relationship, whether it's like a friendship or a familial relationship. It's really hard to make those sort of decisions when you don't have a framework from which to reference. And forever we've relied on religion as that framework. And now, you know, God is dead or whatever. uh, Not to me, but
Or me for that matter.
not to us. But you know, in terms of cultural religion being super like ingrained in an American life, it's just sort of absent. And so I think we're given an opportunity to be able to like identify what our values are, or I guess we're given the responsibility now to be able to create our own systems of value, and being able to do that is first off a huge weight, and secondly something that like no one seems to be telling anyone that they have to do, and so they're just young people seem to be sort of like floating through life, misdirected, not directed at all, and kind of confused, so they can't make those sort of decisions around their dating life, and maybe even beyond dating. They don't even really know how to treat people of the opposite sex, people of the same sex. They don't really know how to behave. There aren't any rules. And so we have to sort of like self-restrict ourselves.
I think there's something to be said about this culture of kind of permissive open-mindedness, which describes almost everything in the world as being like morally acceptable and equivalent. And this is an extremely fluid culture that we grow up in. It's kind of like being dropped into a lake or an ocean, a body of water, and being told to swim. You look at how culture used to function, there used to be a lot more rigidity, rules. I would describe it as kind of hard knowledge, maybe even wisdom, but hard, concrete knowledge and ideas that people could interact with and play off of. And right now, people are just dropped into this body of water. There's no solid object really to kick off of because we can't even have a conversation in the mainstream about what a man or what a woman is because we
Mm-hmm.
don't have in secular, liberal, progressive America a conception of men and women as different from each other.
I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, this feeling of limitlessness, the very structured society that you were describing feels very masculine, in a way that, both the masculine and feminine have these qualities that can become too much and that we want to like get out of. So like in the masculine framework, like the society we were describing before, people might have felt like too restricted. Like there's not, they can't be their entire selves. They can't see what else is out there. In the positive sense, it creates for like slow, diligent growth and usually like keeps people safe and everybody knows how to behave and there's like a real comfort in being able to just like know the rules and play the rules. The other society that you described, this like sort of limitless society, is a more feminine framework, in my opinion. This, like you said, fluidity. This like anyone can be anything and there are no limits. And that's like beautiful in its own way, right? Because self-expression and creativity become this like ever-flowing experience of like there's no ceiling. And but at the same time, there's like no groundedness in that. And then what are we doing, right? Then there's sort of like this everyone's confused. It takes us back to like the Neptunian feminine, which is all about like what's real and what's fake. And yeah, there's no ability to discern in that society what is true and what is false. So yeah, I think this limitlessness in some ways is really great, but like I think in the way that you and I know that masculinity and femininity are like so perfectly aligned and so perfectly matched that like we need a dose of both in order to function well.
I'm interested in this idea of risen, and I'm curious if you have thoughts about infantilization and how it relates to the way men and women are falling out of alignment with each other in the modern world.
Yeah, there's a lot of like on both sides, a lot of like infantilization of others. Um, I think this sort of ties us back to what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, and that it's like an initiatory process opposed to like just something that happens to a person. And I think that if you become an adult person and you don't initiate into the spiritual adulthood, you can sort of like get lost in this. You can ping pong between these two ideas of like, I'm a person and I deserve autonomy, and also please do everything for me because I'm just a girl and I can't think for myself. And so those two things can't be true at the same time. You either need to be an adult who takes responsibility for yourself and your ideas, or you need to be like a permanent baby, a perma baby, if you will. And um, yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who don't want to grow up. I mean, even I think it's really interesting that young people don't want to get driver's license. They don't want to get their driver's license like now. My little cousin like really didn't want to get her driver's license, and I thought it was really weird because it was very exciting to me. But like, there's this like, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to grow up, kind of Peter Pan syndrome amongst a lot of young people. That I think sort of like aligns with this, like, you don't know how to grow up, is like the crux of the issue. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Peter Pan syndrome, and I just have to say that feels so relevant to what's going on in the culture. You look at vast industries like Hollywood and gaming, and there's this constant retreading of nostalgia. Millennials seem to want to spend as much time as possible in that state of like childhood safety and abundance and media. And there is, I think, a point where you do have to grow up and you do have to take responsibility for something. This isn't to say you have to feel shame about the things you like, but it makes me think of that episode of The Simpsons, and there's a character who I forget his name. He's Milhouse's dad, I think, and he's like separated from his wife temporarily, and he has Homer over, and he's talking about how great it is to be a bachelor, and he's like holding a soda, and he's showing Homer his bedroom, and he says, "I sleep in my giant race car bed. Isn't that awesome?" And Homer's kind of like, "I sleep in a big bed with my wife."
No, exactly. Exactly. And even like the video games, like the like just wanting to isolate into like a fantasy. It's like it's very young. I like video games too. I love Stardew Valley. But so it's nice to escape into a fantasy sometimes. But there are real responsibilities, and this is like a real world, and as adults, we actually have total and complete responsibility in how this world is shaped in the future and what it becomes. And I don't think anybody seems to be really concerned about that. Maybe we used to be, right? We used to be a little bit more concerned about what we were doing and how it affected the future.
I think absolutely. Something has
Okay.
kind of gone wrong where our parents grew up in a much stronger and more rigid culture that had more guidance and concrete, as I said, hard knowledge about the nature of reality. Um, and the system changed between the time they grew up and the time we grew up. And we're growing up inside of a system that has a very specific vision of the world and a very specific vision of what you are and aren't allowed to say or think. And one of those things that you're not allowed to say or think about is that men and women are different from each other, and that we have responsibilities that are probably not symmetrical as a result of that. And you see how like chivalry as a masculine virtue has been pretty much culturally obliterated, because the idea that a man should be chivalrous to women is fundamentally an unequal and unequal proposition. Now, at the same time that this has happened culturally in the mainstream narratives around how men should act towards women very badly want chivalrous men in their lives and in the world. And if you read, I shouldn't even say this because I've never read any of these actually, but I'm very confident that if you read those kinds of smutty romance books that women are loving so much these days, you would find characters who are chivalrous, characters who act in traditionally masculine ways, and are very solid, confident, direct, basically all of the things that the mainstream culture says a man is not supposed to be.
Yeah, we should become like those like playboys for incels, that like teach them how to like hit on women, and we should just have them read smut. We could just we could just have the incels read smut, and honestly, most of their problems would be solved. But yeah, I think you're probably right that they seem like women seem like they really want. Because okay, actually, this is something helpful. So, my husband is often referred to by women who hate men, who openly hate men, who say "I hate men" verbally and proudly, and in a way that is almost they think is obvious to the whole world. But they have often said, many of them have said, that my husband they see as an exception to this rule, which I find really fascinating because he's to me like incredibly masculine. And it literally is those things that they used to say they didn't want in a man. It's like the fact that he's like a pretty good listener and also like will open a door for you, you know? Like it's these like very simple things that women 10, 15 years ago would be like, don't do that for me. I can do it myself. And remember the phrase like, I'm an independent woman and I don't need no man. Like it was very like that was very loud. And I know it was like humorous, but it was real. And I think it had an effect on how people perceived men and how we treated men and told them how to participate in society, which is that like be quiet, don't do too much for me, otherwise you make me look weak, and I don't actually need you, and but which is like just fundamentally untrue. I mean, on like a biological level, and also on the reality that we all need each other. And yeah, again, I think that seems to be a huge expression of like the animus is this like I am the man actually, and I don't need some person stealing my independence. Which is that's not what that is. That's not independence. That's a refusal to commune with others and to like be open-hearted. You're closing your heart to the world when you do that.
I think too much independence, when you cultivate it as the highest value, is really just another form of like slavery or servitude. You're just not able to receive something that could have been given to you freely and safely, and your life is going to be smaller because of that.
Yeah.
There's something about how giving love more freely, letting love come to you more freely, really expands your universe. And when you're doing this in connection with who you are as a person and with who other people are as a person, it really opens doors. It expands horizons. You'll have, I think, better romantic relationships. You'll have better friendships. I think that independence as a highest virtue is a trap. I think you don't want to be independent. You want to be interdependent. You want to be connected. You want to have people that you can ask for help when you need it. Someone who will show up and give you soup when you're sick. That will make a difference. And you want to be the kind of person who would show up for others in that way. And that's a mutual responsibility. And if you believe this responsibility doesn't exist, then you're kind of correct, because it's not going to be a part of your life, and your life will be a little smaller and a little darker because of it.
Yeah. Interdependence is such a great word. That was like mind blowing to me when I heard it for the first time. Because everybody had described relationships to me. You know, I was in the therapy space and it was lots of like codependency and dependency and independence. Like, nobody had ever given me a framework from which I could see myself having a relationship where I could depend on somebody without becoming codependent. And yeah, like we have a not just like a like life fulfilling prophecy, but we also have like a duty to share ourselves and allow others to share with us and depend on each other. Because, like, that's just how the future happens. Like literally, like that's how we have babies is when we start like working together and depending on each other. And yeah, it's it's the way forward in my opinion.
I love that framework. And I want to return to the idea of infantilization a bit and talk about kind of the specific ways infantilization shows up in men versus women. What do you think the sort of infantile man looks like?
I think I mean, I think they can look sort of image I have is the man who like separates himself from society to like play video games and live on a trust fund or I think also when women talk about men who want a mommy, like want a woman to be their mommy, that's like a huge way, right? It's like men, this can be really simple, like men who like don't know how to do their laundry. That's that's a self-infantilization, right? It's like I don't need to be responsible for my own clothes. Um, things like that. How do you see men infantilizing themselves?
I would say that's a good framework for it. The pattern I see the most in male infantilization is the rejection of the calling to become a man, to cultivate masculinity. It usually looks like weakness, a lack of ambition, and a lack of like taking responsibility in their life and the world around them. And like you said, some signs of that can be excessive video game use, excessive pornography use, excessive drinking and partying, escapism type of behaviors. There's a lack of self-care in the form of like maybe they don't know how to keep their room clean. Maybe they don't know how to do their laundry or fold their clothes. Or maybe they don't know how to cook for themselves. I think kind of that type of man who has to eat out like 6 nights a week or something because he doesn't know how to cook. That's a man who is very limiting his very limited in his relationship to his own health and his ability to provide for himself and for others. Because I can just tell you straight up, if you're a man and you're having a woman over and you can cook for her, she's going to like that. She's going to feel provided for her. She's going to think this is great. And if you're a man who can't cook and you have a woman over and she's like, what should we do for dinner? And every single time you're like, we need to go out because I don't know how to cook. She's going to be like, well, that story, you know, maybe is okay for a guy in his like very early 20s or something, like someone who like just got out of college and hasn't had the chance to even practice those skills. But if you're in your mid 20s, your late 20s, your 30s, that story starts to get a little bit less appealing and a little bit more concerning.
Or maybe if you're just like an absolute baller who can like afford to go out to eat like and have like nice food on a regular basis. I mean, then it's like kind of like I mean, I think that different people provide different things, you know? And like not everybody has to learn how to cook, but it's like but then you better like then are you expecting the person that you are having a relationship with to be able to fill that spot in your life, or are you going to like take responsibility for yourself? Like there's lots of different ways that we can take responsibility for ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I'm pro learning how to cook for yourself. I think that's probably important. How do you see women infantilizing themselves?
One of the patterns of feminine infantilization is a deep and persistent sense of the self as like an object that other things happen to, just kind of like a ping pong ball. You think of like the ping pong ball in that Atari game Pong.
Yeah.
That is what an infantilized woman looks like to me. She thinks of herself as the ball, and she thinks of everything else in the world as the paddles, and she's just kind of floating around. Things are happening to her, but she doesn't have control. She doesn't have any ability to affect where the ball goes. And you can see that attitude showing up when girls are like, "I'm just a girl." You can see that attitude showing up in relationships where women will date someone who is not good to them for many, many years, and then get out of that relationship and be mad at the world for not protecting them from that. And that's a brutal thing because nobody can protect you from something they don't know about or about how you choose to spend your time. At the end of the day, a relationship of any kind is an intentional choice, and you are bound by your own discernment and your own discretion. And nobody can take that responsibility for you as an adult. I think that people can take that responsibility for you as a child, as an infant, because of course, you have to be protected from society and the world as a child, as an infant. But as an adult, you need to take responsibility for who you spend your time with, what you do with them, and where you're going in life. Because it's very easy for men to say things like, "I'm serious about wanting marriage and children," and creating these kind of pseudo serious relationships that are about really just having access to sex and a girlfriend, but having no intention of actually committing because the man is himself afraid of taking responsibility. And this is like one of those recurring patterns that I see in modern world romantic failures, where women will date men who are kind of just like okay. They're not great men. They're just kind of okay. They're not awful, but they're pretty mediocre. And they have these relationships that last 5 years, 10 years. And somehow the man is never ready for marriage or kids or any kind of escalation of commitment over that long, long period of time. And that is just such a tragic failure mode to me. And it's doubly tragic when the woman who's in that kind of relationship sees herself as this helpless creature that couldn't have done anything differently. Because 2 years into a relationship, you can say, we should be getting pretty serious about each other. We know each other pretty well. We can see where this is going. And if you don't have that understanding of that responsibility, that you can be a person who doesn't just have relationships happen to you, that you're a person who actively shapes and chooses the relationships that you want to have, you're not going to have these horrible, horrible, drawn out relationships that go nowhere because they were never going to turn into a marriage and family situation.
Yeah. That Pong comparison is so good and so true. Like, I think that really is how women often feel. And it's so unfortunate because, like, obviously there's like the bigger reality that it's like I literally shape my reality. Like, I pick the people who are in it. I choose how I spend my day. There's like these like huge things that are like everything that happens to me is like a result of me. To an extent, sometimes things just are weird, but I think also on like a maybe smaller level, something that I think that women really struggle to look at is that even if they're operating unconsciously, those unconscious decisions are a result or are a reflection of the inner self. Or it's a mirror being held up to your inner architecture. So if you're insecure, then you're going to surround yourself with people and relationships that reflect that insecurity back at you and are a reflection of that insecurity. And so I think the first thing that women can do when they're trying to come out of this sort of like helplessness of just being the ball in Pong and bouncing off of the walls is like look at the walls you've been bouncing off of and start asking yourself like why those walls? Like why have I been subjecting myself to those specific things and how do I alter my inner architecture to reflect something different? And it's a really hard thing to do. It requires like an immense amount of self-awareness that I actually don't think that many people have the emotional capacity to do, unfortunately. But I think we have to do it. Like I think it's like this feels like a survival issue.
There's something to be said about these really powerful responsibilities that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. And I think that is exactly one such responsibility. This responsibility to ask yourself, why have I been bouncing off of the walls that I've been bouncing off of? I love that question. Why those walls? And for women, we have so much cultural energy promoting the idea that they're not responsible for the walls they bounce off of, that it completely undermines the awareness of the notion that you should be thinking about that and you should be thinking about where you're moving in life. Because one of the things I know for sure about life is that time as we experience it moves pretty straightforwardly linearly. And we, regardless of how we feel about that, that's what's going to happen. Our life is not going to be, our time is not going to be refunded to us. You're not going to get a second chance to use time better if you use time poorly. And to that end, the worst thing a person can do is to make the same mistakes again and again. And you see that in the infantilized woman, and you see that in the infantilized man. They both are repeatedly making the same mistakes. It's a very bad failure state to be in.
Yeah, that's the ultimate prison. The prison of your own making. That like only you have the keys to, but you think, have you ever seen that therapy meme where there's a bird inside of a cage?
The bird in the cage, and the two bars are like really close together, but then the rest of the cage is open, and the bird could just walk out, but it's holding those two bars so tight.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what's happening. And yeah, we have an option. We have a choice to like, even the way that women feel about men, like if you're walking around talking about how much you hate men, could it be that the men you have surrounded yourself with reflect that truth, that they are horrible? Like, maybe if you started in the same walk around saying life is beautiful, we start seeing all the beauty in the world. Could that be true of the way that we see the people that we surround ourselves with too?
That's definitely been my lived experience, is that the more optimistic I've become and the more I orient towards noticing good things and beautiful things, the more beautiful and good people I see and become closer to. I think women are fantastic. I think women are so much better than they give themselves credit for and then they have awareness of. And I think that applies also to how men think and talk about women, is that women are sacred, beautiful, creators of life. We should appreciate that. We shouldn't denigrate it. We shouldn't cheapen it. And what you said about kind of the quality of people you surround yourself with, and how if you think men are bad and all of the men in your life have been bad, What's especially dangerous about that is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because
Mm.
you're creating a filter that is going to reject men who are good because they don't fit your worldview. I have a friend who, very good looking man, like probably in the 99th percentile of good looks, but he's not had a lot of romantic success or relationship success, in part because he feels insecure about what he has to offer financially. He's
Mm.
kind of a, blue collar guy, um, lives with his parents, and he was on a date with a, lovely, beautiful woman, and she was explaining to him that she doesn't really care about like what he does for work or, how much money he has. And his reaction to that was kind of like, well, you're supposed to care. Like, what's wrong with you? And then he didn't continue dating her. And I
Oh,
thought that's just a perfect illustration of how um, limiting beliefs very quickly become self-fulfilling prophecies, and how if you have a negative idea about what a man or a woman should be or should care about, you're going to reject people who don't fit your worldview.
absolutely. And this applies to like everything, by the way. This is like it's not just about masculinity and femininity or romantic relationships. This happens in friendships all the time too. Um, and family. And, we don't get to choose our family, but we do get to choose like how we react to them, and how we react to everybody. So,
On that theme of reaction, one of the things that men and women alike feel a lot of scarcity and fear around in the modern world is rejection. What do you think about rejection and its role in the current misalignment between masculinity and femininity?
yeah, I mean, I think that like when people generally reject like what we were talking about and being like, I hate men, I hate women, these like huge, like overarching ideas, I think that it's like super damaging. Um, but I think also I'm a big believer in rejection as redirection and sort of like it helping us get into alignment. And that the less that we like sort of like play with each other and the less that we like try to game each other, the more we openly reject one another, the closer we get to the answer quicker. Um, you and I've talked a lot about like ghosting as being sort of part of this theme of like people just sort of like disappearing and like leaving things sort of still open, and this refusal to confront the and really actively reject somebody. And that feels very covert and dangerous and sort of like a net negative to everybody, because one, if you're the person rejecting, you're still kind of still kind of have like a toe pinned to the threshold, and if you're the person who's being rejected, you're sort of like living in this mystery of like maybe they're doing something else, maybe they're busy, like you're also still stuck in it, so nothing ever closes completely and you never get to like really get into something in its entirety with somebody. There's always like these everything's too loose, you know?
Ghosting, I think, is a good example of a sort of culture of infantilization emotionally playing out in the real world. Because it's really not that hard to say to someone, I enjoyed spending the time getting to know you, but I don't think we're right for each other for a long term relationship. Best wishes with what you're looking for. It's not hard to do that. And the fact that people would rather avoid that small responsibility, which I think is a responsibility, that we do have a responsibility if we've opened the possibility of a relationship with someone. We have a responsibility to close that loop when that decision is made. Ghosting is immaturity and a fear of having a real conversation. And I don't know how you could expect to have a real relationship with someone if you're afraid to have a real conversation with someone. There's, I think, a thread. It's a deep thread to what's going on with masculine feminine misalignment that runs along that theme of what responsibilities do we have to each other. And I think men and women alike at a decent scale are not taking those responsibilities as seriously as they need to.
Totally. And I mean, even sometimes I like to reframe this of like, what responsibility do we have to ourselves? You know, not that I believe that it's that the responsibility we have to others is more important than the responsibility we have to ourselves. But we live in a culture that is like super self-oriented. So I think it is important to like acknowledge the ways that it's good for us too. And I think that's effective in a lot of ways. But when we leave those threads sort of completely loose and unclipped, we become disoriented, right? Like there's all of these, we're not clear about what relationships we're participating in and which relationships we're not participating in, which we're committed to, which ones we're not committed to. And it's the same with sort of ghosting and closing these threads. It's like we have a responsibility to ourselves to take that off the docket, to be like, that is over with. I'm closing that door and I've communicated it clearly and I don't need to think about it anymore. Like, I think it's really bad for our psyches to have all of these sort of like loose relationships hanging out in the background as like a forever possibility, because then we never make a decision towards somebody. And then I think it creates a commitment issue too, that if we have all of these relationships, these maybe relationships behind us, then it becomes very difficult to commit to one person.
On that theme of rejection, I think a lot of men have really intense fears of rejection, and the intensity of that fear causes them to like either not try to pursue a romantic relationship with someone or not feel like it's safe to ask someone out on a date. I'm curious, what would you say to men who are so afraid of rejection, thinking about it from the perspective of like, you're a woman who wants what's best for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think that really summarizes it, right? Is that like me to say something, or are you asking, can you ask me that question again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can. Um, so if you're thinking about this from the perspective of a man afraid of getting rejected by a woman, what is something that might be helpful for them to hear or helpful for them to understand about what it's like as a woman to have to give that rejection?
Oh yeah. I mean, nobody likes to deliver bad news, you know? I think women, I mean, there's a primal reality for women, right? That like could result in injury. And I think that's where a lot of women's fear of hurting people comes from. Whether it's true or not, there is this like sort of anxiety that lives within women that like somebody could hurt me for receiving the wrong thing. And I think women have this desire to please as a result of that. You know, if men are providers in the traditional sense, then women's resources are always sort of on the fringe and are always sort of reliant on her ability to please. And so I think that women still have that anxious feeling living inside them, whether it's real or not, like whether the stakes are real or not. And so I think it's just really hard for women to get past that anxiety of confrontation And even if it's good for her to be able to say the truth, if it's good for you to say the truth, and I think receiving that as a man, the best thing you can do is appreciate how difficult it is for a woman to say that, and also acknowledge that her rejecting you is getting you closer to a person who's going to work for you. And like every person is just a stepping stone to the person that is right for you. And also that she might be giving you some hints and some clues as to how to find that person in the way that she rejects you.
I have a lot of empathy for both how difficult it is to be rejected, because there was a long period of my life where I was not really romantically successful. And a big part of that was because I was just so insecure that I was kind of rejecting myself. I wouldn't really ask women out. I wouldn't, if a woman was interested in me, I would kind of like come up with a story to talk myself out of like, no, she's not interested in me.
Mm. Yeah.
And on the flip side of it, it's also really, really hard to reject someone because you know it's going to make them feel sad, and it's not really about like them. It's often more about like what you're looking for in a person. It's about who you are. It's a really difficult thing to express kind of compassionately and humanely and honestly. And I think that men who are struggling with this fear of rejection, the best possible mindset you could have is, you know, look, my soulmate girlfriend is on the other side of a dozen or 100 rejections, and I need to put myself out there and get more real world experience and more real world data. I need to be cultivating the things that will make me attractive to the person that I want to be attractive to. And if you're trying to appeal to everyone, you're probably not going to appeal to anyone. There's something to be said about how important it is to be specific. And the more specific you are, the more you're going to know what you're looking for. And you're going to be able to trust your feeling that, okay, this relationship is a good one. This feels good. And that's going to guide how you move. It's going to guide how you show up in the world. And rejection is a good thing if it forces you to level up, which is the masculine response to failure. The masculine response to failure is not to throw up your hands and say, oh, wow, society is so unfair. Women are so unfair. It's all so unfair. I'm a victim. The masculine response is to say, I'm going to keep lifting the heavy weights and get back out there and keep looking for my person. I'm going to
Yeah.
not, I'm not going to get hung up on the past. I'm not going to dwell. I'm not going to give up. I'm not throwing in the towel.
Simultaneously, I think that like the feminine energy of that sort of same concept is to just enjoy. Like, enjoy your life, create a beautiful life, and focus on like creating a beautiful day to day life for yourself that you can eventually invite a man into when he says, I would like to invest in this life that you've built. I would like to put more resources towards you building a beautiful life. And yeah, I think that's how women get away from that chasing behavior and into this state of like sort of like becoming like an elusive fawn, you know? Like I think men see women as sort of mystical creatures, as like these like wild things, and I think women need to like own their sort of like wild primitiveness of being sort of mystical and mysterious and beautiful in that way, and then like just wait for a man to want to invest in that. And it's really difficult, I think. I think it's really difficult now that women have there's such an emphasis on women making money and providing for themselves. And they kind of have no other choice. I think that's really, to me, very upsetting, is the way that the economy has reoriented around women being a part of the work field. Not because of women, but because there's now the possibility of two people, of like a two working household, that there's, you know, that we used to always have somebody at home. And now the economy orients around both parents working, both people in a couple working. And women don't really have the opportunity to be able to be those like mysterious, beautiful, life building people without being dependent on somebody in some way.
We have this cultural narrative of kind of the feminists of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s as being like these transgressive countercultural forces, but the end result of all of the activism and the changes that they made for society was to double the supply of labor, which effectively halved the value of it. And it's a very pro-corporate thing they've done, because the workforce loves what's going on and how much labor is available and how disposable and interchangeable that labor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've created a market where it's very competitive. You know, we have more workers than we have jobs, and none of us get paid enough to not work. Some of us do, but it's a really tiny amount of people. And yeah, I think that sort of like has totally shattered our ability to function as we were intended. And I think those women, you know, maybe those women really did want equal opportunity. Maybe those women were like me and were more masculine leaning and just wanted to like do something for themselves and be able to make their own money. I like totally get why somebody would want to break free of that mold. But the consequences have been like totally limiting in women's ability to choose for themselves.
I want to explore the and relationships in kind of the so-called sexual marketplace, because this seems like one of the areas where men and women are less in alignment than in others. Why is this? Why are men and women out of alignment in the sexual marketplace?
I don't know.
Asymmetry that has occurred, where my perspective, I'm going to speak off the cuff here. From my perspective, the bar as a man feels incredibly low to me.
Okay.
If you exercise, have a job, some kind of career ambition, if you have your life together, if you dress well and groom yourself well, you're going to more or less be in the top 20% of eligible men out there. And that does not seem like a very high bar to hit to me. I think that because of this asymmetry, men who would traditionally be the pursuers have now kind of become the people who are being pursued and the people who are being chased. And there's a lot of women chasing and competing for a relatively smaller available population of eligible, dateable men. And this asymmetry comes, I think, from how many men have just withdrawn from the sexual marketplace and the dating marketplace. There's a lot of men who really will spend their entire life playing video games and using pornography. They're going to fall into this escapism, this world of what's not real, but what's easy. instead of doing the hard work, relatively speaking, of cultivating an intentional good life that compounds in the real world. And because of this asymmetry in supply, everything is out of whack. I truly believe that the idea that women have unrealistic standards, that women are too shallow, too picky, any of these things you see most typically from kind of the incel or manosphere regions of the internet, I think those complaints would completely evaporate overnight if every young man took care of his body, exercised, dressed well, and had some ambition. And this is a positive message. It's an empowering message. I think that the culture we have against male ambition has really hurt men because we have this story in the education system that progress, social progress, looks like fewer men succeeding, that it's not good for society when men succeed. And that is a terrible message, and it's a false message because success is not zero sum, and the world desperately needs good men. The world desperately needs men to be ambitious, to try to have a positive effect on the world, and to people, and to be doing hard things. So that's my message to all young men who are struggling with dating is take care of yourself. Because if you take care of your body, if you take care of your mind, if you take care of your spirit, beautiful and good things are going to organically and emergently come out of that. People will see who you are, people will like who you are, and people will move towards you. So don't give up hope. The bar is lower than you think. Go to the gym, lift heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe both groups need to compete, especially men. I mean, men really like enjoy competition. Um, and, but I don't think we should like ignore them when they say that they're like, we don't feel like there's anything to compete for. Because I think that like women can be really mean. And I think it can be like sort of a painful world to be competing in. But I think that that's also like sort of just like the reality of being alive. And like that's no reason to like give up on what we want in the world. And it actually should be encouragement to like be better and get stronger. It's really, I mean, dating I think is incredible exposure therapy, really so good for your ability to like see things in yourself that need correcting and also to like just deal with rejection. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that people really voice what they want from people too. And that we're conscious of our response to that, to be more competitive and to better ourselves as a response, opposed to giving up.
I loved that idea you brought up earlier of rejection as redirection, because I think that's exactly right. And I can personally say, having been rejected in the past and taken it really, really hard, that is not an ideal outcome. That is not an ideal orientation. And the more rejections you cultivate, the less you're going to care about any given one, because it means you're putting yourself out there, you're going forward, you're trying. And that is something that can be intentionally pursued, is that you can intentionally take girls out on dates or ask girls out on dates where you might not be ready, you might not be like on her level, but if you're self-doubting to the point where you don't even ask her out,
Mhm.
you're never going to get any kind of real world data. And this is one of the most consistent things I think that like really attractive women say, and I believe them when they say this, is that they don't get asked out very much because a lot of men just self-select out of believing they even have a chance
Yeah.
with them. And if you think that women are really shallow and will only date you if you're like the most attractive, conventionally looks maxing whatever person in the world, you're going to be signaling to the world that you don't think of yourself as valuable. But
Yes.
in reality, women tend to be pretty open to dating a guy who's funny, who has good conversation, good banter. And there's a lot of different ways to be attractive to women. And you don't really need to single in, especially on the things that you're weakest at. Focus on your strengths, and that will make you much more attractive as a man.
Yeah, I think the looks maxing thing is so fascinating. To me, it's like such an expression. Like to me, it's so like, okay, so you're just telling the world that you're insecure, right? Like that seems to be like the message that I get, right? Is that like you're so deeply insecure about the way that you look that you feel the need to take a hammer to your cheekbones. That's the only signal that I get from these people, and they seem to think that it's actually signaling like some sort of status thing, but it's not dissimilar to like a woman who, remember in the early 2000s how like women used to get these like absurd tans, like these crazy tans, and like dye their hair like bleach blonde, like literally like chemically destroying themselves for the sake of like looking attractive. Like those people to me just only signals insecurity. So that's not to say that you can't take care of yourself and like try to look your best and like you said, emphasize your strengths. But like if you take it, if you're not doing like the underlying work, then like it's just going to show in your actions, and then everyone can like sort of like see you. And I think that the most underused dating tool is just like deep authenticity and like sort of a polished version of you at your most true. In some ways, like me at my most true is like totally disheveled in the morning and like not put together. So like I have to like slap a little bit of paint on it before I like come out into the world and say hi. But like that, at the core of it, like underneath all of those things, is like me in my most true self, spoken clearly and unafraid of being rejected by others, because I know that when they reject me, they're rejecting me and not some sort of costume that I put on. And so in that way, I think people think that like, oh, well, if I show my true self, then like they'll be rejecting me and that will be more painful. And it's like, yes, that will be more painful, but it will also mean that they're really not for you. Like it's not just that, oh, I didn't put on a good enough performance. No, like they're saying like we are not right for each other. And so you need to just like go get reps. And like you and I talk about all the time, because we both like weightlifting, you're just going to like build ego strength until you find someone that you're just like locked with.
Deep authenticity is just fundamentally hot. It's attractive up to the world. And if you're hiding yourself, you're actually not going to know if somebody likes you.
Mm-hmm.
And if
If it
you're
works out,
hiding
it'll be
yourself,
bad.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that's the situation you want to be in, is holding a mask up for the entire rest of your life about who
Yeah.
you are and what you care about.
You're like, I'm
And
so
people,
glad they
that
love this
happens.
version of me. Gotta maintain it.
This thing happens because people will fake their way into long-term relationships, into marriages, and then it eventually collapses because it was never real, which is another bad outcome. So
Horrible.
authenticity protects you from a lot of things. Uh, it protects you from rejecting yourself, because if you're hiding yourself, you're rejecting yourself. it protects you from misaligned relationships because if you're masking yourself, you're not going to get into an aligned relationship. That's a fundamental aspect of it. And authenticity protects you, I think, from, to a certain extent, it protects you from attracting the wrong people too.
Yes.
When you're yourself and you're honest about what you like and what makes you feel alive and what turns you on, all of those things, it's going to attract the right kind of people for you. And if you hide that, you're going to end up with all sorts of complications and knots to untangle. And it usually just collapses like a house of cards, anyways, in the end. So, what was the point of all that?
Yeah, just to feel safe and comfortable for like 2 seconds. Yeah. Well, let's get it back on track. Matt, why are men and women perfect for each other?
Beautiful question. Men and women have a deep natural state of alignment, I would say. And this deep natural state comes from our complementary natures and complementary designs for each other. If you think about a group of people, would you rather have everyone be a 5 out of 10 at a bunch of things? Or would you rather have some people be a 9 out of 10 at something and some people be a 2 out of 10 at something, and it's okay because the distribution of stats is much greater combined than it is individually? So how are men and women designed for each other? How are they perfect for each other? I think men are physically stronger than women. This is a basic fact about reality, and it's one that should be celebrated because strength is a good thing. Men do good things with that strength. You look at the world around you. Your house, your home was built by men who are strong. And that's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing. So much of civilization and society is built on masculine strength. And you look at a train going down the tracks, that's a beautiful masculine creation right there. I think that femininity has this deep, deep capacity for nurturing, for developing, for drawing out of people. And it's a cliche, that idea that behind every great man is a great woman. I think it's also completely true. Women elevate men. I don't think of many great men who did not have great women in their lives. Myself, I have been personally elevated by, my relationship with my mother, by my relationship with romantic partners and lovers. The people that I've dated have really significantly impacted me and elevated me, caused me to be more ambitious, to be more solid, to try to be better, to keep growing. And it's a really good thing. It's a really positive thing. I think women do that in so many ways just by their nature, just by existing. And you see it in the workplace, you see it in schools, you see it in community and social spaces. I think women just create beauty and social harmony where that wouldn't exist otherwise. And that's something that the world desperately needs. And it's a gift. As a man, you should honor that it's a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. We were joking off stream that men and women fill each other's holes. But,
It is true.
but it's true.
Repeatedly.
In many ways. And so, but I think really they do like fill each other's gaps in sort of like fundamental spiritual ways. Like you said, men and their strength is amazing, and women have this like beautiful way of inspiring men to create more and more and build more and more. I love thinking about like Noah in The Notebook and how he literally like fell in love with a woman. She didn't reply to him for like a year, and then like 5 years later he just built her a house and then was going to sell it, wasn't even planning to give it to her, was just like, she inspired me so much. I don't know where to put all this love. I have to build a house. And like a house that she had wanted when she was like in high school. And so like obviously that brought them together and made them fall in love at the end. But like ultimately, I don't think that he built that house to like win her over in some way. I think women just have a way, like when men fall in love with women, or are uh, sort of mesmerized by a woman, it inspires him to make something because he doesn't know what else to do with that energy. Men are very action oriented, and so they have to do something with it. I think that's probably what's like so upsetting about this misalignment, is that men don't feel that urge to do something with that feeling, or aren't feeling that at all, aren't feeling that like deep inspiration that women give. Likewise, women are so scared in the like financial market and like providing for themselves, this independence thing that we were talking about, that they can't be as inspiring as they could be because they're afraid, and they're worried that giving away their love is going to put them at risk somehow. And so we both lose in that scenario, right?
We have a lot of scarcity based narratives, I think, especially around women, because we have
Mm.
this idea in the mainstream culture that women's time is more limited than male time. That is to say, that a woman is going to age out of beauty or fertility, and that her value is going to drop as a result of that. And I think this is a really, really complicated thing to talk about and complicated thing to think about, because it's both a biological reality that if you're a woman and you want to have children, you have a window where that's more or less likely to happen. But that window is not a fact, it's not a truth, it's not a hard limit. Different women have very different experiences with when they're able to have kids and when they're not. But this idea that women stand to lose more with their time, I think, causes a lot of women to either use their time recklessly because they're afraid of taking on that responsibility, or to have a scarcity mindset and think, okay, my time is so precious that I need to um, set a standard that's so high that nobody can meet it. And all of these are, I think, kind of in some way like a dishonest or like emotionally dishonest response to what's true about reality. And in particular, the idea that women become less beautiful as they age is a very, I think, reductive way of thinking and looking about it. A lot of the most attractive women I know are in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. Women really grow into their bodies and their confidence and their feminine intuition with age. All of these things make a woman much more attractive to a man. And youthful sex appeal, it is a real thing, but it is not the only aspect of beauty. And it's something that we need to have in our cultural conversation around aging, is that women age beautifully. Women age really, really well. It's not a bad thing to be getting older. You're probably going to become, like, on average, sexier and more confident and wiser and all of these good things as you age.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from a embodied perspective of like being a woman who like does have a biological clock ticking, it does feel very real. And it is, there's like truth to it, right? That like there will come a time where I, won't be able to get pregnant anymore. And to me that's like it's so specifically put on women because we're the ones who have the bodies that do it. But like greater than that, it really feels like a death issue more than like I mean, all aging issues to me are like a death issue of like coming to terms with the reality that your life will end. And that is just one ending that sort of like leads towards death. And to me, like the only solution to that is to just like be very conscious of death at a very early age. Like just be sort of aware and unavoidant of the reality that we're always like coming to an end. And actually, I think that too, that's like the feminine wisdom. That's like the most complete feminine wisdom is like this ability to like be in communion with the cycles and understand that everything that begins ends and be totally like comfortable with those realities and being living within those realities. I think that that's sort of like the shaman archetype is this like shepherd through the old wise woman is like this shepherd through the spiritual and including into the world of death and endings. And the yin is actually like one of the key words for yin, which is the feminine energy, is destruction and destroying, not dissimilar to death and endings. Whereas, for males, it's creation and building. So yeah, I think this fear of aging sort of into that in a way of like our own fear of yin and our own fear of that death and destruction that women have, which feels so out of alignment with the healthy feminine, which is like totally comfortable with that ending.
One other aspect of masculine feminine alignment that I wanted to also natural proclivities towards certain types of activities or orientations towards the world that are mutually complementary. If you look at the stereotypical single man's apartment, it's not a very aesthetically furnished place. The average man does not have great style or great taste. There's a reason that there's the meme of the guy who moves into a new apartment and he's really, really happy when he has like the camper chair and the TV with the video game console set up, because it's like that's all a man needs to keep himself entertained for a while. And women have, I think, a more grounded, you could just say a deeper connection to aesthetic beauty in that sense. They really care a lot about spaces and environments. They tend to appreciate and center beauty more in their life. I think the masculine complements this with a sort of practical application of strength and effort. A good home requires both the feminine eye for beauty as well as the masculine strength for labor and creation. And somebody has to build the furniture, somebody has to do the gardening and the roof work and all of these types of things that create a sturdy, strong, safe space for the softer feminine beauty to be protected and for it to thrive and grow. And being in that kind of an environment is really good for your spirit. I think men kind of hurt themselves if they're disconnected from the feminine, because they're not going to be living as beautifully as they could be, and they're not going to be centering beauty as much as they could be.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I actually think the house is I like the house as a self image, right? Like in Jungian dream analysis, if you dream of a house, it's a reflection of the inner self and how one feels about the inner self. And there's like a lot of different interpretations you can do with it, but I also like it as a really clear image of the masculine and feminine, and how they sort of like work in tandem together. Because, like you said, there's the framing and the structure, which is really like specific and mathematical and necessary to keep the structure standing. And then there's like the interior and the painting, and in some ways the feminine, sort of like decorative and beautification, is like destroying the thing that the man made. Like they're putting holes in the wall to hang pictures. You're painting walls that were, drywalled. There's like a sense of like sort of destruction and change in that foundation, but it's in the name of beauty. And yeah, that feels like a perfect sort of like comparison to how they work together.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you about is how has your life changed as you started to believe that masculinity and femininity are not in opposition to each other or not in conflict with each other, but rather in deep alignment?
Yeah, I think I was able to integrate my masculine a lot more when I became comfortable with my femininity and like able to sort of soften. It's funny how when we try to like express something, express either femininity or masculinity in like a overt way, as like sort of a defense mechanism, how it comes off as sort of like the toxic version of the opposite. So when I was trying to like exude masculinity and really like have dominance over others, I was sort of like emotionally volatile and erratic and sort of unhinged, if you will, because I wasn't very integrated. So getting to like accept these energies and like get comfortable with my femininity has actually sort of like allowed me to express masculinity in a much like clearer way, and a much more authentic way. So I'm coming to the realization that, although I was trying to express masculinity in a dominant, reactive sort of way, I actually am a more masculine person when I express it in authenticity opposed to as a defense mechanism. And yeah, I just find my ability to like express myself more freely and like see myself more clearly is sort of there in that ability to integrate those energies into my behavior. How about you? How do you feel?
So for me, my life really opened up the more I embraced this idea, really this truth that men and women are in deep alignment with each other. I think I started noticing patterns and opportunities for collaboration and flirtation and romance and all of these beautiful things, where before I might not have been aware of them. I would have not been attuned to their existence in the fabric of reality. And part of this is a confidence thing, part of this is a perception thing, but I kind of view the world as enchanted and playful. It's very improvisational, and men and women are meant to be dancing in that energy together. We're meant to be flirting, we're meant to be making each other smile. I think men are supposed to be slightly exasperating to women in a way that's like loving and fun. I think that's a good dynamic. I think as a man, you have an energetic privilege of getting to push buttons sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think as a woman, you also have that same energetic privilege of getting to push buttons sometimes. And it's fun. It's fun to push each other's buttons and see how we how we react. Um, there's this element of myself which I also really grew into the more I thought about masculinity and femininity as kind of distinct and concrete things, which is that I am a man with a very feminine spirit. And as a man with a very feminine spirit, if I was denying that about myself, I would show up in the world in a way that feels really spiky and not, I think, solid, not safe. I think about, as we discussed earlier, masculinity being a little bit more solid and femininity being more fluid. And I think when you have the disintegrated masculine feminine energy inside of you, it kind of looks like a sharp, spiky object in a stormy ocean, kind of getting batted around. And it's not something that people want to play with. It's not something that people want to be near. It's scary and dangerous and bad. And for me, integrating my kind of, feminine interiority, and actually, really, that's the sort of dominant interiority of myself, is that I have a very feminine way of relating to people and looking at the world. When I accepted that about myself, I suddenly just felt all this like tension and conflict kind of falling away. And there was like a harmony that existed as a result of this. There's, I think, also power and strength, and it just feels good. And paradoxically, one of the things I hear a lot more from women is that I show up as really masculine in the world, which is kind of funny to me. It sort of feels like I've found a cheat code where I get to be completely playful and very fluid, very flowing in how I relate to people and how I talk to people, while also getting seen as the best version of my gender. It's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I have a similar experience of the more that I embraced my masculinity, the more feminine I appeared to people. I think this also might just be a result of being in authenticity though. That like being in authenticity is non-resistant, right? There's no trying to be. There is just being when you're authentic. And so there's a natural sort of like relaxation that happens. Or I think for men, it's often like appears like a natural confidence that happens that makes people be like, oh, you appear so masculine, when really like they're just appearing incredibly confident. And likewise for me, I'm just appearing incredibly calm, which to them reads very feminine. And yeah, it's a lovely place to be.
So there's a question I've been wanting to ask you about the sort of shapes of men and women, so to speak, metaphorically. And this idea comes from a tweet I saw. Women are an infinitely complicated, infinitely textured, three-dimensional shape. Men are an infinitely repeating, but very simple two-dimensional shape. What do you think about that description of masculinity versus femininity?
I mean, intuitively, I like it. Uh, Men being sort of repeating. I think that aligns really well with the way that women experience men. And the bodily experience of men from like a hormonal standpoint, right, is that they're like experiencing the same hormonal state every single day. And yeah, I think that's a really great description. Who said that?
One of my mutuals on Twitter, Prince Vogelfrey, I believe is
Okay.
his name.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try to find the actual tweet because it's a good one. But I like that idea of women as infinitely complicated and infinitely textured, infinitely detailed in a three-dimensional shape. And there's something about, I think, the fluidity of woman that is captured in that visual metaphor.
Yeah. It feels like a sort of like ripple in time sort of situation going on, right? Like there's a lot of images online of like entrances to portals being these sort of like ripples of reflection and water and air, like sort of like in midair. And I do feel like that's how I experience femininity. And I think that's why I think of it as so like mysterious. And that's why people speak of it as so mysterious, because it's like if I touch it, like what's it going to do, you know? Whereas like if you have a box and then like a bunch of other boxes, you know, I mean, you can see it pretty, it's so solid, you can just grab it, you know?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks. So what are you reading this week? Are you reading anything? I think we're like nearing our end. Are you reading anything of value this week that you're excited about?
Well, I haven't started reading it actually, but a friend of mine who I happen to be talking to at this exact moment told me that she recently started reading 1984. And so I am going to start reading it alongside her, and that's going to be fun. We're going to do a little book club impromptu about it, and we'll be thinking a lot about freedom and totalitarianism, I'm sure.
It's me.
It's Shelby.
It's me. I'm reading that, but I'm also reading something else too.
I was going to
I've been
say, what
reading.
are you excited about, Shelby, this week?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, I am really excited. I checked my email on our break, and my copy of Practices in Apparition is on my doorstep right now.
Oh my God.
So, so I'm really excited to read it. But I'm also reading Fame Sick by Lena Dunham right now. So I have many books on the docket at the moment.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for listening and joining us as we talked about masculinity and femininity. And we look
Yeah.
forward to seeing you next week.